Imagine being alone, surrounded only by the sounds of nature and the tranquil reflection of the water, until something unexplainable happens and turns the silence into pure terror. Today, I'm sharing with you chilling and real stories from fishermen who encountered the unknown on their journeys. Get ready for tales that will make you think twice before sitting alone by a lake or river. Turn off the lights, turn up the volume, and join me as we explore the dark mysteries lurking in the waters. Let's go to the first story. My name is Louise. I've been fishing for most of my life, and I've experienced my fair share of strange and unexplainable things out on the water. But nothing could have prepared me for the night I'm about to share. This wasn't just eerie or unsettling. It left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the sea and what might live beyond our understanding. At the time, I was staying in a quiet coastal village. The kind of place where everyone knows each other, and the stories about the sea seem to be passed down through generations. It wasn't a tourist spot, no fancy resorts or crowded beaches, just rugged cliffs, dense forest, and a small harbor where weathered boats rocked gently with the tides. The locals were welcoming enough, but they had their superstitions. Several of them warned me about a particular area offshore. They wouldn't even call it by name, referring to it simply as that place. When I asked why, the answers were vague: bad things happen there, or it's not a place for us. A few even crossed themselves while talking about it. But curiosity got the better of me. I was used to tall tales and fishermen's exaggerations, and I figured this was just another local legend meant to scare outsiders. It was a perfect night for fishing: calm waters, a bright moon, and a cool breeze carrying the salty tang of the ocean. I prepared my small boat with everything I'd need: bait, extra line, my trusty flashlight, and a thermos of coffee to keep me awake. As I loaded up, an old fisherman approached me. He was wiry, with a face like leather from decades under the sun and wind. "You're not going out there, are you?" he asked, nodding toward the horizon. I shrugged. "Why not? The fish don't care about stories." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's not about fish, son. Out there, the sea isn't the only thing watching you." I chuckled nervously, trying to brush it off, but his words lingered as I set off. The engine hummed softly as I steered toward the forbidden area, a spot marked by jagged rocks jutting out of the water like the spine of some long-dead beast. I reached the spot around 11 p.m. and dropped anchor. The water was eerily still, and the moon cast long shadows across the rocks. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Even the usual sounds of gulls or splashes from fish were absent. I cast my line and settled in, telling myself the strange silence was just my imagination playing tricks. About an hour in, things started to feel off. It began with a faint sound, almost like whispering. At first, I thought it was the wind threading through the rocks, but it didn't match. The whispers were rhythmic, almost like chanting, and seemed to be coming from beneath the water. I leaned over the side of the boat, peering into the dark depths. The moonlight reflected off the surface, but I couldn't see anything unusual. That's when I noticed the water. It wasn't moving like it should have been. The gentle waves had stopped entirely, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, a splash broke the stillness. I whipped around, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. At first, I saw nothing, just ripples where something had disturbed the surface. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement, a pale shape, impossibly long and serpentine, sliding just below the surface. My heart pounded as I tried to convince myself it was just a large fish. Maybe an eel or a shark. but the way it moved wasn't right. It was too smooth, too deliberate, like it was watching me. The whispers grew louder. This time, they weren't coming from the water, they were inside my head. Words I couldn't understand, spoken in a voice that didn't sound human. My hands shook as I pulled up the anchor, desperate to get away. As I started the engine, something slammed into the bottom of the boat with such force that I nearly fell overboard. The flashlight slipped from my grasp and clattered to the deck, its beams slicing through the darkness. The boat rocked violently as if something massive was circling beneath me. Panic set in. I gunned the engine, the boat lurching forward as I sped away from the rocks. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, filling my ears until I thought my head would split. It wasn't until I reached the harbor that the sounds finally stopped. The moment I stepped onto solid ground, an overwhelming sense of relief washed over me. But when I looked back at the water, I swear I saw a pale, elongated figure just beneath the surface, watching me. I never went back to that area, and I don't plan to. Whatever was out there wasn't something I could explain, or something I ever want to see again. The sea holds many mysteries, but not all of them are meant to be understood. Is it still there? Let's go to the second story. My name is John. I'm not a fisherman by trade, but I've always loved fishing. It's something about the quiet, the patience, and the connection with nature that draws me in. Over the years, I've gone on countless fishing trips, some alone and others with friends, but there's one night I'll never forget. It's a memory that still haunts me whenever I'm near the water. This happened about 3 years ago during a camping trip with a close friend of mine, Mark. We had driven out to a remote lake deep in the woods, far from the noise of civilization. The lake was known for its crystal clear water and abundance of fish, and we figured it was the perfect spot to spend a weekend relaxing. We arrived in the late afternoon, set up camp near the shore, and spent the evening fishing and enjoying the peace and quiet. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the lake turned into a perfect mirror, reflecting the deep orange and pink hues of the sky. It was the kind of moment that makes you feel grateful just to be alive. After a while, Mark decided to call it a night. He was exhausted from the long drive and said he'd get some rest before joining me for more fishing in the morning. I, on the other hand, wanted to take advantage of the calm night and the full moon illuminating the water. Fishing at night had always been my favorite, it felt almost meditative. I stayed behind, sitting on a small wooden dock that stretched out into the lake. The air was cool but not cold, and the only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I cast my line and settled in, enjoying the solitude. An hour or so passed uneventfully. I was about to pack up and head back to the tent when I noticed something odd. The water near the middle of the lake began to ripple, as if something large was moving just below the surface. It wasn't a fish jumping, it was too deliberate, too slow. I squinted, trying to make out what it was, but the moonlight only revealed the faintest outlines. Then, I saw it. A dark shape, much larger than any fish I'd ever seen, broke the surface briefly before disappearing again. It was hard to judge its size, but it had to be at least 6 or 7 feet long. My first thought was that it could be a large sturgeon, but something about the way it moved didn't seem right. It wasn't swimming like a fish, it was gliding, almost as if it was being pulled by something unseen. I watched, frozen, as the ripples grew closer to the dock. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was overreacting, but every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get up and leave. Then I heard it, a low, guttural sound, like a growl, coming from the direction of the ripples. My heart raced as I scanned the water, desperately trying to locate the source of the noise. The sound grew louder, more guttural, and it didn't sound like any animal I knew. Suddenly, something hit the underside of the dock with enough force to make the wooden planks vibrate beneath me. I stumbled back, dropping my fishing rod into the water. The ripples were now circling the dock, and I could see the dark shape moving faster, closer. I scrambled to my feet and ran back to the shore, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. When I reached the safety of the campsite, I woke Mark, who groggily asked what was wrong. I tried to explain what I had seen, but even as I said the words, they sounded ridiculous. A dark shape in the water? A growling noise? It didn't make sense. Mark laughed it off, saying I was probably just tired and letting my imagination run wild. But I knew what I'd seen and heard. The rest of the night, I stayed near the fire, unable to shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching. The next morning, I hesitantly returned to the dock with Mark to retrieve my gear. The lake looked calm and beautiful in the daylight, completely at odds with the terror I'd felt the night before. My fishing rod was gone, of course, but what caught my attention was the dock itself. Several of the wooden planks had deep scratches in them, as if something with claws had raked across the surface. Mark tried to come up with logical explanations. Maybe an animal had come during the night, but I knew better. I've never gone back to that lake, and I don't think I ever will. Whatever was out there wasn't something I could explain, and it wasn't something I wanted to face again. Are you ready for the next story? Third story. I'll never forget the first time I truly felt fear while fishing. My name is Daniel, and I've spent most of my life exploring rivers and lakes, chasing that peaceful solitude only nature can provide. But one night, on a river far from any town or city, I realized some places hold secrets that are better left alone. It was late September, and the weather was just starting to cool down. I had driven out to a remote stretch of river I'd heard about from another fisherman. He described it as untouched, almost magical, with waters teeming with fish. The catch? It was hard to get to, and no one ever stayed past sundown. He didn't explain why, and I didn't ask. The journey there was rough. A narrow dirt road twisted through dense forest, the kind where the trees arch over you, blocking out the sky. By the time I arrived, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the river. The water was calm, almost unnaturally so, and the air carried a strange stillness. I set up my gear along a rocky bank, where the river curved gently. The spot was perfect, secluded, with plenty of overhanging trees for shade. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, I lit a small lantern and cast my line into the darkening water. The first hour passed uneventfully. I caught a few small fish, but nothing worth keeping. It wasn't until the lantern started flickering that I noticed how eerily quiet it had become. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of the river flowing. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. I chalked it up to my nerves. Being alone in the dark can do that to you. But then I noticed something strange. Across the river, just at the edge of the trees, a faint light appeared. It was small and pale, like the glow of a candle. At first, I thought it might be another camper, but the light didn't behave like a normal flame. It moved erratically, floating through the trees in a way that defied logic. I watched, transfixed, as it drifted closer to the riverbank opposite me. That's when I saw it, or rather, them. The light wasn't alone. As it drew nearer, it illuminated the outline of a figure standing just behind it. Tall and impossibly thin, it looked almost human, but not quite. Its proportions were wrong, its limbs too long, and its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if it were trying to study me. Every instinct in my body told me to leave, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, my eyes locked on the figure as it stepped closer to the edge of the river. The light floated in front of it like a guide, casting eerie shadows across its distorted form. Then, without warning, the figure stepped into the water. The river should have rippled, splashed, something. But the surface remained perfectly still, even as the figure began to wade toward me. The light followed, bobbing just above the water like a will-o'-the-wisp. My heart was pounding as I scrambled to pack up my gear. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped my lantern. By the time I looked back, the figure was halfway across the river, its movements slow but deliberate. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Grabbing my things, I bolted up the bank and into the forest, not stopping until I reached my truck. The whole time, I could feel eyes on me, as if the figure, or whatever it was watching me leave. When I finally got back to the main road, I pulled over to catch my breath. My hands were still trembling, and my chest felt tight, like I'd been running for miles. I didn't look back at the river, not even once. To this day, I don't know what I saw out there. I've told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light or a shadow playing on my fears. But deep down, I know that's not true. I haven't been back to that river, and I never plan to. Some places are better left unexplored, and some sights are better left unseen. Now the fourth and final story. Fishing has always been my way of finding peace. My name is Gary, and I've spent most of my weekends near the water, chasing that sense of calm that only comes with the rhythm of casting a line. But one particular trip made me question whether the water is as peaceful as it seems, or if it hides something darker, something that's better left undisturbed. This happened a few years ago when I decided to try a new spot recommended by an old fisherman at a bait shop. He told me about a small, secluded lake deep in the woods. He described it as pristine and quiet, but his tone shifted when he added, "People don't stay there after dark." When I asked why, he just shrugged and said, "You'll see." I thought he was just trying to spook me, so I laughed it off and decided to check it out for myself. The drive out there was uneventful, a winding dirt road that seemed to go on forever. The lake itself was beautiful, clear water surrounded by towering pine trees, not a soul in sight. It felt like I had discovered my own private paradise. I set up my gear near the shore and spent the afternoon fishing. The lake was everything the old man had said it would be. I caught a few decent-sized bass and enjoyed the quiet, save for the occasional sound of birds or the wind rustling the trees. As the sun began to set, the lake transformed. The water turned into a sheet of glass, reflecting the deep oranges and purples of the sky. I was so mesmerized by the view that I decided to stay a little longer, despite the old man's cryptic warning. Around dusk, I noticed something strange. The birds and insects that had been so active earlier were suddenly silent. The only sound was the occasional ripple in the water, but even that seemed muffled, as if the lake itself was holding its breath. I tried to shake off the unease and focused on my fishing. That's when I saw it, a small, dark shape floating in the middle of the lake. At first, I thought it was a log, but it moved in a way that didn't make sense. It wasn't drifting with the current, it was moving purposefully, almost like it was swimming. Curious, I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the shape. The beam barely reached it, but what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a log, it was a figure. It looked human at first glance, but something was off. Its skin was pale, almost gray, and it was floating upright, its head tilted back as if it were staring at the sky. Its long, dark hair spread out around it like seaweed, and its arms hung limply at its sides. I froze, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a body? Was someone drowning? But it wasn't thrashing or sinking, it was just there. Then it moved. The figure slowly turned its head toward me, and though I was too far to see its face clearly, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like I was being watched. It began to drift closer, the water around it eerily still. Panic set in. I grabbed my gear and stumbled back toward my car, tripping over roots and rocks in my haste. As I reached the edge of the trees, I dared to look back. The figure was now closer to the shore, its head still tilted toward me. I didn't stick around to see what would happen next. I jumped into my car and sped down the dirt road, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. When I finally made it home, I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, that my mind had been playing tricks on me. But deep down, I know what I saw wasn't natural. I've told a few people about that night, but no one believes me. They laugh it off or say I must have been tired. Maybe they're right, but every now and then, when I'm fishing alone, I catch myself glancing at the water, half expecting to see that pale figure staring back at me. These were some of the most chilling stories shared by fishermen, experiences that remind us the unknown is closer than we think. Maybe next time you're by a lake or river, pay a little more attention to what's happening around you. You never know what might be watching from the shadows. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Until next time.